Alaska. How do you cast your vote?
Alaska's motto is North to the Future. And that's exactly where Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are going to take us. A future full of opportunity for everyone. As a teacher, a union member, and a proud Black woman, it is my honor to cast Alaska's 19 delegates for the next president of these United States, Kamala Harris.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. This episode is about the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, which concluded Thursday, August 22nd, when Vice President Kamala Harris accepted the Democratic nomination for President of the United States. I was lucky enough to be one of the 19 official Alaska voting delegates to the convention. We also had pages, administrators, and non-voting delegates, and I will try to speak to a wide variety of them on today's episode. So now I'm back in Anchorage, and I'm reaching out to as many Alaskans who are in Chicago with me as I can get a hold of. First up, we have Jessica Cook. We just heard you delivering the delegates from Alaska. We just listened to the clip. So can you talk a little bit about what that experience was like?
A pure adrenaline rush full of pride in my state and just an honor to represent the rest of the delegates there, represent the Alaska Democratic Party, and an expression of hope for the future of not only our state, but our country.
I think most people know who you are. You were the lieutenant governor candidate with Les Guerra, who was the Democratic governor candidate in 2022. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
I am a public educator. I just started my 24th year. In fact, I had 2 days with my students before I had to leave them for a week. So I felt a lot of teacher guilt leaving my kids for a week. But I am a middle school social studies teacher at Greening Middle School in Eagle River, which is part of the Anchorage School District, where I actually went to middle school. Let's see. 2 generations of my family, almost 3 generations now, have gone to Greening and Chugiak.
Your family being from the Eagle River, Chugiak area, you living and working there. I just talked to a couple of folks who think that this enthusiasm for the Harris-Walz ticket could potentially move Alaska to Harris-Walz. I think that's really wishful thinking. What's your perspective?
So it's interesting you say that. I did grow up Eagle River Valley, and I moved from one conservative valley to an even more conservative valley. I actually live in Palmer, which you know is in the Mat-Su Valley, and teach still in Eagle River Valley, and I am true blue. I do think that we are more purple than people tend to realize. And I think what we need to do, what we need to focus on is actually getting people out to vote. If we could get people out to vote, I honestly think we could actually have a purple state, not just in our hearts, but actually on the map.
What was the most impactful moment for you?
I know there were several times I looked at the people next to me and I'm like, my face is leaking. Gus Walz stole my heart. His reaction told what type of man Tim Walz is, what type of father he is. It wasn't a scripted moment. It was pure and honest and raw. And I think that's what really got me, was just how honest it was.
Anything else that you wanted to tell our listeners?
Yes, being a part of this moment in history as a multiracial woman, as a public educator, as a middle-class average American is monumental. We are living this right now. I was recalling to my daughter 2008 election, the night that Barack Obama was elected, and I sat in front of my television and cried. Barack is mixed, I'm half Black, and the sky's the limit. Really, the United States of America is a land of opportunity, and it's a land where dreams can come true. It's up to us to make sure that it stays that way. We all have a choice to make on November 5th.
Representative Andy Josephson, was this your first convention?
This was my second convention. I attended the 2016 Philadelphia convention.
How did this one compare to that one for you?
One thing that stands out is there was more unity. Remember that there were a huge number of Bernie Sanders supporters who felt that the party infrastructure of the Democratic Party had in some way, been unfair or stolen away their candidate's nomination, and that they were deprived of that opportunity. There was bitterness about that. And in this convention, we have none of those issues.
We have some people who just feel overwhelmingly that it's just very unlikely that Trump will win again. And then we have this other faction that are convinced that no matter how hard we work, no matter what we do, this is going to be an absolute struggle, even past the election. Where do you fall on that spectrum?
So I'm obsessed with the national polls, and I look at them 5 or 6 times a day. The site I go to is Real Clear Politics. It shows right now that if the election were held today, that Kamala Harris would win the popular vote and lose the election. That's what it shows. Until I see Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Arizona, Nevada, and possibly Georgia moved to the blue corner, I think that our chances are less than 50-50.
What particularly stood out to you at this convention?
One thing is just the sheer diversity of delegates at the convention. You talk about a real reflection of the American people that was ever present. There was a discussion of the theme of joy, but I think it was a real thing. You talk about exhausted, albeit, but happy people who were proud of their candidate and their party. And so those things really stood out.
Was there a speaker that didn't get as much attention as you think they should have that particularly made an impact on you?
The former Secretary of State of Georgia, whose name escapes me, was outstanding. But some of
You
them
mean
had very...
the former lieutenant?
Yes.
Jeff Duncan, that was his name.
Yes, that sounds right.
Here's a clip of former Georgia Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan speaking at the DNC last week.
Let me be clear to my Republican friends at home watching. If you vote for Kamala Harris in 2024, you're not a Democrat, you're a patriot. In our family, my wife Brooke and I are raising 3 boys, and we have a family motto. And it says, doing the right thing will never be the wrong thing. During 2020, during the lowest of lows, when we had armed officers outside our house protecting us from other Republicans, Donald Trump had targeted us. My son came downstairs, and he handed me this coaster that I'd given him years before at a father-son retreat for our church. And he said, hey, Dad, doing the right thing will never be the wrong thing. Stay strong. To my fellow Republicans at home that want to pivot back towards policy, empathy, and tone, you know the right thing to do. Now let's have the courage to do it in November.
Brenda Knapp, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I've been active in the Democratic Party, and all of my activity as a Democrat has been in Alaska since about 1986. I went to work in the Sheffield administration, and as that year went on, I'd gotten active in the Sheffield re-election campaign, and that led to being active in the local Democratic Party, now known as Tongass Democrats, but it was then the Greater Juneau Democratic Precinct Committee, ultimately ran for National Committee Woman 4 years ago. And then I got it again. I was very pleased and honored to get it a second term. It's been very exciting for me to be at this convention. This is my 3rd convention. I was first elected as a delegate in 2012, in 2016, and now this convention. And I will say this, of the 3 I've attended, this is without question the most exhilarating and most buoyant convention I've been to of the 3. The one for Hillary in 2016 was also very good, but there was a tension there because Bernie Sanders was an active and well-loved candidate. He did ultimately nominate her at the convention, but that was still hard for a lot of people, including Bernie.
What was one of the most impactful moments for you?
There were several of them. I think for me, I knew, of course, that Kamala, we'd already, as a party, had nominated her. This was just going through the final ceremonial confirmation of her nomination. So it wasn't like that was so impactful. I think it was hearing the speeches that led up to that time, especially some of them like Hillary Clinton. Having been there 8 years ago now when she was nominated and going through her campaign, I certainly knew how devastated and incredulous she was, even though she won the popular vote by a significant amount, that she didn't win in the electoral count and what that meant for our country. I've heard her speak since then, but this is the first time I heard her speak where I could tell she really had reconciled that loss. But it wasn't an emotional thing for her. Whereas with Biden, he was good, but you could tell he's still disappointed.
Do you feel more worried about Kamala's nomination, or do you feel like this time we broke the code, we know how to do this?
No, I'm not taking that for granted. That Heritage Foundation group that has put together the Project 2025 document, they are really the power behind the throne. Trump is a puppet, a front for them, and they're behind him and pushing him forward to get him into office, which he wants. But they will be in control, and they are more dangerous than he is because he doesn't have those kinds of plans. He's very undisciplined and very off the cuff all the time. But these other people are very scary people who have the legal minds and backgrounds and education experience to be able to do what they want to do. And that's what makes it scary. So no, I don't think we have it in the bag, assuming we do win the popular vote and the electoral vote. If we can make that all of that happen, it's not going to just stand there. They're not going to accept it. We're going to get incredible pushback. And there may well be violence. I hope not. I hope we're prepared for that too. I feel very good about where we are, but having seen what happened before, I'm not taking anything for granted.
Representative Genevieve Mina, what was the convention like for you?
The convention for me was such an incredible experience to have because I was a delegate at the 2016 DNC convention in Philadelphia. And when I was a delegate back then, I was 20 years old. I'd been involved in Democratic Party politics for less than a year. And it was a bizarre experience to even be elected and selected as a delegate for the national convention. And as someone who is freshly into politics, seeing all of these national figures, hearing the President of the United States, Michelle Obama, give her "when they go low, we go high" speech was very formative to me because it's often isolating to be an Alaska Democrat and be involved in the Democratic Party. And so meeting other Democrats across the nation, it's just a good experience. But this convention, 8 years later, was such a culmination, I feel, for myself and all of the work that I've been doing with the Democratic Party. I used to be president of the Alaskan Democrats. I've done a lot of different political training programs related to first and second generation immigrants. I've done organizing, and I've met many Democrats within the Filipino American network and Asian American Pacific Islanders, also doing legislative work. And I can't tell you how happy I was every single time someone would just yell my name. And it was someone that I'd met and done some work like a few years ago on whatever campaign. And so to be involved in the party 8 years later at convention, that's one of the most exciting things for me. It's just, this is the Democratic Party, the oldest political party in the world. One of my best friends is the executive director of the Congressional Progressive Caucus PAC, and they had an event where the speakers were Secretary Haaland, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, and Bernie Sanders. I remember seeing Bernie Sanders speak in 2016 at one of our breakfasts. I was a Bernie delegate. Bernie was a huge part of my political formation and me interacting with politics, organizing people and fighting for working families and people who are completely ignored by political establishments and our government. Hearing him speak in 2016 and just being part of that whole movement was so inspiring. And I think a big thing for me at this convention is seeing all of the different speakers who also got involved and got elected because of Bernie. Seeing AOC speak, seeing Congresswoman Jayapal be part of that movement with Bernie. And so ultimately for me, I don't really follow national politics, but he was a core part of me being involved and shaped how I do politics.
Any particular moment that stood out to you?
The gun violence portion almost had me bawling. Gun violence is a sensitive issue for me because I'm also a survivor of gun violence. My dad died by suicide, by gun suicide. And hearing those speakers in having to relive that trauma every single time that there's these unnecessary massacres in our schools.
Here is Kimberly Metcalfe, whose daughter was killed in the Uvalde, Texas school shooting in 2022.
It's 10:30 a.m. at Robb Elementary in Uvalde. The school is recognizing my 10-year-old daughter, Lexi, for receiving all A's. She receives a Good Citizen Award, and we pose for photos. She wears a St. Mary's sweatshirt and a smile that lights up the room. 30 minutes later, a gunman murders her, 18 classmates, and 2 teachers. We are taken to a private room where police tell us she isn't coming home. Uvalde is national news. Parents everywhere reach for their children. I reach out for the daughter I will never hold again.
It is soul crushing. It's just such an uphill battle to fight for better gun control and to prevent unnecessary deaths.
Particularly in Alaska.
Absolutely. And we have the highest rates of gun suicide deaths, and we have some of the least regulations in the nation.
Rozlyn, Grady, Wyche, what was the convention like for you?
It's my first convention. This is a major historical convention. It was emotionally overwhelming. I think one of my favorite parts was being at the Black Caucus. Cory Booker, the beautiful Maxine Waters, Jasmine Crockett, Ayanna Pressley, the DNC was the Super Bowl of politics.
You're a teacher, a new teacher. This was your first year in the classroom.
Yeah, okay, so I made it to the first 2 days of school, but I did miss all of last week, which was the first full week. When I got voted to become a delegate, I immediately contacted my principal, told them what was going on, and was immediately approved. When I did get up to important political people, I was able to get them to shout out my schools. So I was able to send that to my 6th grade team and to my principal, and they were just okay, that's super dope.
Who was the best person
I don't
that you got?
I got to talk to Ayanna Pressley, actually, Representative Ayanna Pressley. She was so nice.
Massachusetts?
Yeah, but also Representative Jasmine Crockett. Representative Jasmine Crockett was a defense lawyer. So now it makes a lot of sense, how she gets down and how she can go back and forth and call people on the spot. And
hey, speaking of Jasmine Crockett, can you talk a little bit about her speech at the convention?
I loved her speech. I loved how real her speech was, especially with her being a freshman politician. So when she was talking about the pressures and how she felt quitting, but then Vice President Kamala Harris came up to her and just gave her that, I'm gonna call it that Black woman connection, hold your head up, it's gonna be okay.
And here's the clip of Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas.
I was going through all of this when I visited the Vice President's residence for the first time. As I approached Vice President Harris for our official photo, she turned to me and asked, "What's wrong?" Mind you, we'd never met, but she saw right through me. She saw the distress. I immediately began crying. And the most powerful woman in the world wiped my tears and listened. It's so hard for me to tell this story. She then said, among other things, "You are exactly where God wants you. Your district chose you because they believe in you, and so do I."
That is most definitely needed because of the way that cultures are presented, especially when they're negative. Like that could be a real strain on us as Black women. And like we know our why. It's just like me. I know my why. I know that I'm a teacher because of the children. That's where it starts. It started with my kids and it ends with everyone else's kids. But sometimes you come up against so much negative culture, whether it's at whatever school or whatever environment you're in, that sometimes it makes you like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. It was like a real moment between her and Kamala. I loved her speech. I loved how real her speech was.
Next up, we have Alaska State Senator Bill Wielechowski. I had to do this interview while Senator Wielechowski was at the airport, so I apologize for the sound quality. Bill Wielechowski, tell us a little bit about the convention for you. What was the experience like?
The energy was absolutely through the roof. I have never experienced that level of excitement, that level of energy, especially considering that it was over 4 days. It was just incredible. People are excited. People are wanting change in this country, wanting to move our country forward. And it was just amazing to be able to be part of it.
Was there any particular moments that really resonated with you?
The one thing that really stuck out to me, the speeches were fantastic. And the crowd appreciation, Joe Biden and his 50 years of service, he got a 4-minute standing ovation. The speeches of Michelle Obama were just fantastic. For Winfrey gave a fantastic speech. The level of talent, oratory skills were just incredible.
I'm glad Bill mentioned Oprah Winfrey. There had been rumors that she might speak at the convention, and I had questioned whether that was true because Oprah is not a Democrat, which people were skeptical about. So I was really grateful in her speech when she affirms that she is not a registered Democrat, and here it is.
You know what? You're looking at a registered independent who's proud to vote again and again because I'm an American and that's what Americans do. Voting is the best of America. And I have always, since I was eligible to vote, I've always voted my values.
Veronica Slajer, tell us a little bit about yourself and your relationship to the Alaska Democratic Party.
Okay, I'm a lifelong Alaskan. Originally from the deep south of Alaska. I'm from Ketchikan. I live in Anchorage. I have served in various different capacities in the Democratic Party. Currently, the regional vice chair for Anchorage, but most kind of relevant and topical position I have right now is the chair of Alaskans for Harris Walls. I've been working in this role in a volunteer capacity since 2020, actually. So we started Alaskans for Biden in 2020. And we take a lot of joy in realizing the fact that we came closer to winning Alaska than we'd had since LBJ in the 60s. And we think we can do it all the way this time.
You think Alaska could go blue?
Definitely Anchorage. But yeah, that's what we're after.
Was this your first convention?
This was my first convention, yes. 62 years old, first convention. I felt like I was 12.
Yeah, what was the convention like for you?
Oh, it was fantastic. There's so much to do. And you look at the agenda every day and you have your eye on the prize of whoever's going to be speaking that night, thinking, oh, all these other people, I don't really know who they are. Everybody was amazing. I was gripped by every speaker.
No, there were a couple of speakers that were bad. When you have that many speakers, of course, a couple of them aren't going to be that great. Was there? What was a really impactful speech for you that you're going to remember forever?
I'm 62 and short-term memory is a thing. But I have to say I was surprised at how moved I was by AOC. I've always liked her, but I was never, my demographic is such that I'm more of a moderate middle. And what I really liked is that she has not just come into the fold, the tent, but she is a supporter of the full breadth of everything what Democrats mean. And I think it's just what I saw was not her compromising her values. What I saw was her expanding her values and really growing into her role. So I really enjoyed watching her. And, of course, she's an amazing speaker.
Here's a little taste of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Congresswoman from New York, speech.
I am here tonight because America has before us a rare and precious opportunity. In Kamala Harris, we have a chance to elect a president who is for the middle class because she is from the middle class. She understands the urgency of rent checks and groceries and prescriptions. She is as committed to our reproductive and civil rights as she is to taking on corporate greed. And she is working tirelessly to secure a ceasefire in Gaza and bringing hostages home.
Senator Gray-Jackson, was this your first convention?
Yes.
What were the most impactful moments for you?
There were so many impactful moments, so many. Just seeing the crowd of folks, Democrats, and I bet there were some Republicans there too, but Democrats and people who really believe in Vice President Kamala Harris. That just made me feel really great. I was impacted by President Biden's talk. It was amazing and it touched my heart immensely. And I was impacted by Michelle Obama and Barack Obama, but mostly Michelle because I have a lot of things in common with her. She's 5'11" and I'm 5'11", okay? And in 2015, I had the opportunity to introduce her at the White House event on her Let's Move initiative and so many wonderful memories. And I always take one soundbite from every talk she gives. And the first one was, when they go low, we go high. And the other day, the soundbite that I took was, when there's a mountain to climb, we don't have an escalator to get us there. And it's so true. And I'm going to say that forever because it's true. We do not have an escalator to get us to the top of the mountain.
Can you just talk about like the experience as a whole?
I'm so grateful to President Biden for having the courage to step aside and do what he believed was right for our country. It takes a lot of courage to do something like that.
And here's that clip of President Joe Biden explaining why he stepped aside.
It's been the honor of my lifetime to serve as your president. I love the job, but I love my country more. I love my country more.
Mike Wenstrup, tell us who you are and what your role is in the Alaska Democratic Party.
Sure. I am the Alaska State Chair. I live in Fairbanks, Alaska, and I was first elected chair in 2012, stepped down in 2016, and then ran again in 2022, and have been chair since then.
How many conventions have you been to?
4, if you don't count Zoom conventions.
Okay, yeah. Which ones have you been to?
2008, 2012, 2016, 2020, 2024.
How did this year's convention compare to the previous ones you've been to?
This was better than any convention I've ever been to.
Even 2008?
Yes, this was the best.
What made this one so great?
The energy, the excitement, the joy, the unity, the candidates themselves, the speakers, and just even the presentation of the convention itself.
I found it really remarkable, the inclusion of so many Republicans. Did that leap out to you at all as being an unusual phenomenon of this convention?
I think so, yes. I would say that there were a lot of Republicans, especially people who happened to know Trump or had worked with him or had been in Congress and just had seen how toxic he had been as a president and how they did not want to go back to that.
Speaking of Republicans speaking at the convention, here's a clip of Olivia Troy. She was the Homeland Security and Counterterrorism Advisor to Vice President Mike Pence.
I grew up in the kind of working family that Trump pretends to care about. Conservative, Catholic, Texan. July 4th was our most sacred holiday. Those values made me a Republican. And they're the same values that make me proud to support Kamala Harris. Not because we agree on every issue, but because we agree on the most important issue, protecting our freedom.
Kimberly Metcalfe, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Was this your first convention?
No, actually, it was my fourth.
Which other ones have you been to?
I was at the 2004 convention in Boston for John Kerry. That's a convention where Barack Obama was introduced to the nation. He gave his incredible speech there.
And then what other conventions have you gone to? 2004?
2012. And then I went to the 2016 convention in Philadelphia. And that was also a really fun convention. The aftermath was awful, but the convention itself was wonderful.
What's your background?
My father was a territorial legislator. He served in the 1951 and 1955 territorial legislatures. So I was raised around the people who worked so hard for statehood. I was just a kid, but I knew who territorial governor and later U.S. Senator Ernest Greening was, Bob Bartlett, our first governor, Bill Egan. Katie Hurley was a close family friend. All those folks that worked so hard to achieve statehood. And I have 8 siblings. We were all raised here in Juneau by parents who really believed in the Democratic Party and in working people, working families, raising kids to be good citizens. And I remember when things changed for the Democratic Party, when big oil came in and a lot of people from the oil industry flooded into the state, changing the state from largely Democratic to Republican. I've seen a lot of changes in my lifetime, but I've always been a committed Democrat.
Were there as many Republican speakers at the previous conventions that you went to?
I don't recall. There may have been 1 or 2 but I just can't recall any. I think the one that was the most incredible was Adam Kinzinger. He's a guy that really put it all on the line. He knew that he wouldn't be able to run again if he went against Donald Trump. And he's a guy that's been to war. He's done amazing things. And it's so brave for him to come out and speak at our convention. I was very proud of him.
Here is a clip of former U.S. House Representative Republican Adam Kinzinger of Illinois speaking at the Democratic National Convention this past week.
We must put country first. And tonight, as a Republican speaking before you, I'm putting our country first. Because the fact is, I do belong here. I know Kamala Harris shares my allegiance to the rule of law, the Constitution, and democracy. And she is dedicated to upholding all 3 in service to our country. Whatever policies we disagree on pale in comparison with those fundamental matters of principle, of decency, and of fidelity to this nation. Listen, to my fellow Republicans, if you still pledge allegiance to those principles, I suspect you belong here too. Because democracy knows no party. It's a living, breathing ideal that defines us as a nation. It's the bedrock that separates us from tyranny. And when that foundation is fractured, we must all stand together, united, to strengthen it. If you think those principles are worth defending, then I urge you, make the right choice. Vote for our bedrock values and vote for Kamala Harris. God bless you.
Jacob Begich, tell us a little bit about yourself and your relationship to the Democratic Party.
Yeah, so born and raised in Alaska, family's deeply involved in Democratic politics. A while back, I started getting a bit more involved politically, like I wrote an op-ed about ranked choice voting, stuff like that, but I've been a lifelong Democrat.
How old are you?
22. Barely.
Okay.
Just turned 22.
Just turned 22. Happy birthday. Yeah. And I think you were one of the youngest on the floor for sure with the Alaska Delegation. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that as a great privilege and great honor to be a page for the Alaska Delegation. It was great.
What was most meaningful for you about being at the convention? I assume this was your first.
Oh, yeah, definitely was my first. I would say, honestly, hearing all of those great speakers throughout the entire event and kind of getting more energized as a Democrat, especially with our new candidate. I know a lot of people my age were looking for someone a little bit younger to head the ticket and more energetic. And I think Vice President Harris really embodies that. And you could tell through her speech and through how excited everyone was. I think that was the most meaningful thing to me.
Was there any particular moment that was impactful for you that you think folks at home may not have appreciated in the same way?
That's a good question. Because I would say the most impactful thing for me was when Barack Obama's speech hit on tones of civility, talking about how your cousin or your uncle or your grandparents might say something a little off kilter or a little bit offensive, but you don't automatically assume they're bad people. We should extend that same grace to everyone in our country. I think that really was impactful for me because I just graduated from Georgetown University, like definitely saw a lot of polarization and kind of demonization of the other, of people that might not vote the same as you. I saw that a lot, especially amongst young people. And I think it was really important to hit on that. It gets tiring to have the us versus them mentality against like fellow Americans all the time and assume everyone is like evil and hates this country just because they don't agree with you on everything. Most Americans are in the middle, like center left, center right, and agree with each other on maybe 80% of things, I think. Maybe I'm being too optimistic with that. But especially in Alaska, where our politics aren't always defined by just red versus blue. We have coalitions in the legislature of the center left and of the center right. I that's why it was especially important for me to see that as an Alaskan.
And here's that clip of former President Barack Obama.
We need to remember that we've all got our blind spots and contradictions and prejudices. And that if we want to win over those who aren't yet ready to support our candidates, we need to listen to their concerns and maybe learn something in the process. After all, if a parent or grandparent occasionally says something that makes us cringe, we don't automatically assume they're bad people. We recognize that the world is moving fast, that they need time and maybe a little encouragement to catch up. Our fellow citizens deserve the same grace we hope they'll extend to us.
Monica Southworth, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I am originally from Unalaska Dutch Harbor, born and raised in Alaska, and went to college in Minnesota and moved to Juneau in 2011. And I worked at the legislature for a couple of different folks, session only until 2014. And since 2014, I've been working at NEA Alaska and as a UNISERV director for 7 years, and the last 3 years as in a bargaining and research position. So it's a statewide position. And I also am the treasurer for the party, and I've been doing that for 2 years now.
And was this your first convention?
It was.
And what was the experience like for you?
I cried every day. It was absolutely amazing, overwhelming, inspiring. I love this convention because I feel like the Democratic Party is finally starting to reflect my values more. I've been a Democrat because I mostly agreed with a lot of things. And so you're not going to have the perfect union of beliefs, but we're talking about freedom as Democrats. I feel like that's been something that Republicans have had ownership over for a long time. It's like the freedom of, as Governor Walz says, to mind your own business. And I think as Alaskans, you help your neighbor regardless of their politics. We've always done that. And now it just feels like it's being put on this national scale. And we're hearing that from our leaders.
Was there a particular speaker that you feel like maybe didn't get as much attention that was particularly moving or impactful to you?
There were so many speakers. I'll be honest, like sometimes it was a little bit overwhelming. So I know like in a text message, you had said that you were like going back and rewatching everything. I have been going back and rewatching everything. And one of the speakers that I wasn't necessarily listening to in the moment, was John Russell, and he was listed as a content creator, and I think he's also an influencer. He talked about the origins of rednecks and how they would wear red scarves in the labor movement in Appalachia. It seemed to me that it was a pushback against the J.D. Vance values. It felt like he was taking back those terms and the culture and saying, J.D. Vance does not represent us. This is who we are, and I'm here as a Democrat. Also, the theme of labor was sprinkled throughout the entire convention in many of the speeches that I haven't heard before.
Here is John Russell speaking at the Democratic National Convention.
In West Virginia, they called us rednecks back in the 1920s because striking workers from all different races wore red bandanas around their necks as they fought and died for respect and a living wage. Their fight yesterday is our fight right now. It is our choice to build on this progress and to create a political home for the mass of working Americans fighting for control over their government, their workplaces, and their planet. And it is our moment to live up to.
Lindsay Kavanaugh, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm the executive director of the Alaska Democratic Party. I've been in this position since September 2019. And prior to that, I worked on Capitol Hill for 17 years.
Hey, where are you right now? Because we're going to hear a little bit of background noise, so I just want to be able to say.
Oh, I am actually flying out of Chicago now with our ops director. So Fauna and I, at staff of the convention, had to do some of the cleanup. So I'm in the airport.
How many conventions have you been to?
This was my first convention. So in 21 years,
Really?
yeah. Really? Can you believe it? 21 years in politics, and there's never been to a convention. Now, technically, I should have been at the 2020 convention, but it was all online because it was COVID. So
Right.
extraordinary to have this be the first one.
Was there a particular speaker that was meaningful to you?
Yeah, for me personally, because my background in Capitol Hill, I worked in the Pentagon and I worked on national security issues for Mark Begich and other members of Congress with Leon Panetta, former Secretary of Defense, who is a wonderful human being. But I also think there are a lot of things we took back the narrative on, and national security was one of them. We sometimes forget that we got Osama bin Laden under the Obama administration. We are strong on national security. We don't coddle dictators like Putin and Kim Jong-un.
Here's former Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta.
My fellow Americans, I'm proud to have served in the Army, the Congress, the White House, Chief of Staff, CIA Director, and Secretary of Defense. I've looked into the eyes of our warriors and deployed them into battle. I gave the order directing our Special Operations Forces to fly 2 helicopters 150 miles into Abbottabad at night. And by the time the sun rose, Osama bin Laden was dead.
Fauna Hunt, I know you're at the Chicago airport. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what your role is with the Alaska Democratic Party.
So I'm the operations director for the Alaska Democratic Party, which basically that is exactly what it sounds like. It's logistics. It's anything that impacts the actual physical operation of the office or events surrounding the parties. For the convention, for instance, I was in charge of making sure that we had internet and making sure that we had breakfast and making sure that everyone's hotel rooms got booked.
Hey, we all had hotel rooms and breakfast and internet, so good job.
Hey, look at me go.
Was this your first convention?
Yes, it was.
And what was the experience like for you?
It was amazing. It was a really spectacular convention. I think they did an excellent job with the program. I think they did an excellent job with capturing the energy that has infused the electorate with the change in the ticket.
Was there a particular speaker or presentation that really impacted you?
Michelle Obama's speech. She's such an amazing speaker, and listening to her get up there and just tell us in no uncertain terms to go out and do something was really like, okay, you don't have to move mountains, just go do something. And I thought that was really impactful. I also very much enjoyed the moment where Kerry Washington was on her knees with the little girls teaching us how to say Kamala's name. I felt like that was a really sweet moment, but it was also a little bit of a sick burn to those people who can't seem to figure out how to say a very simple name.
People like President Bill Clinton, who mispronounced her name every time he said
I
it.
wasn't going to say it.
Yeah. Anyway, hey, Fauna, travel safely. Jasmine Carter, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am a born and raised Alaskan, daughter of 2 immigrants. I am a first-generation college graduate. I'm a UA.
Where are your parents immigrants from?
My mom immigrated from Michoacan, Mexico, and my dad is from Tres Rios, Costa Rica. I've been involved in politics even before I could vote. I remember I was a poll worker during the 2016 election, both the primary and the general election. And I was 17 at the time, so I couldn't even vote in that election.
And was this your first convention?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it was my first convention.
What was the experience like for you?
I just kept thinking about how Representative Josephson said that it was like Disneyland for Democrats. I definitely feel the same way, but even more because I was around just so many amazing change makers from across the country. And yeah, so it was definitely Disneyland for Democrats.
Was there a particular speaker or presentation that was personally impactful for you?
When Vice President Harris was accepting the nomination and when she was saying on behalf of immigrants, that really just hit me just because, like I said, I am a daughter of immigrants. So just to see her really own that identity, Vice President Harris speaking about her mother, it just hit so close to home. And just seeing that displayed on a national level was something I'll never forget.
If you don't mind me asking, your mom's from Mexico and your dad's from Costa Rica. How did they pick Alaska?
So my mom is one out of 13 kids, and her oldest brother, so my oldest uncle, he came up to Alaska one day or for a trip. He's a big hunter fisher. And so he visited Alaska, loved it, and decided to stay and open up a Mexican restaurant in Kodiak first before heading to Anchorage. But then my mom came up to work and she also loved it. And she was with my father at the time, and they decided to move up here. They've been up here since the mid-90s, I believe.
Any last thing that you want to say to our listeners about your experience at the convention?
It was truly the greatest honor of my lifetime being there to witness that history.
Here is the clip of Vice President Kamala Harris accepting the nomination for president. You'll notice her alluding to immigrants twice.
And so, on behalf of the people, on behalf of every American, regardless of party, race, gender, or the language your grandmother speaks, on behalf of my mother and everyone who has ever set out on their own unlikely journey, on behalf of Americans like the people I grew up with, people who work hard, chase their dreams, and look out for one another, on behalf of everyone whose story could only be written in the greatest nation on earth, I accept your nomination to be President of the United States of America.
Senator Löki Tobin, was this your first convention?
This was my first convention. I heard from several folks who have attended previous conventions what to expect and what to anticipate. And from what I have gathered, it was a convention unlike any other.
That is the consensus. And You have nothing to compare it to, but what was the experience like for you?
I was not a voting delegate. I participated in the DNC Rules Committee, which, when previously explained to me, was an easy lift. It was not going to be as involved. And little did anyone anticipate that our presumptive nominee would step down and we would need to codify a set of rules to instill a new nominee within a very short time period, a very small window. It was exhilarating and exciting to be right there in the room with a seat at the table, to have a real authentic discussion about what does it mean to be the Democratic nominee for president, and what were the expectations and criteria that we as members of the Democratic Party would evaluate whoever was going to be the person we elevated to that role.
I remember trying to get a hold of you a couple of times in the month leading up to the convention, and you being in Zoom meetings for the Rules Committee.
They were very long and very thorough. And I think the piece that was interesting to watch from an insider perspective was all of the critiques and opinions of outsiders on how we as Democrats were setting up the guardrails and the structure for a completely unprecedented process. I am very thankful at all of the people who had been Rules Committee members for decades on their expertise and insight, because I don't think we would have been able to do it with such alacrity if we didn't have those perspectives in the room.
It was a talking head on some news program, I don't remember who, said that in Michelle Obama's speech, when she talked about how for people like her, they don't get second, third, and fourth chances if they bankrupt a business. They don't get to fail forward. They don't have the affirmative action of inherited generational wealth. And the talking head made the point, Kamala Harris delivering her speech on Thursday was one of those examples where someone like perhaps the Republican nominee for president could crash and burn and it wouldn't really have an effect. But for her, everything was riding on it. Did you see her speech in that way as well? Like she had to deliver?
Yes, I've been thinking about this quite a bit because I've been reading some of the commentary online and listening to the pundits dissect not only Kamala's speech, but also Michelle Obama's speech. And it's something that really stuck out to me that Michelle Obama said, which is we all needed to prepare ourselves for the naysayers, the doubters, the folks who would be critical of our presidential nominee. And I was prepared for those who are not in our party, for those who inherently disagree with our worldview and the joy that we're trying to bring forth into the world. But my previous experiences within the Democratic Party, I was not prepared for the insiders to also cast shade. And for me personally, a Black woman, a person who's grown up with a mixed race family, that blended, beautiful family that Doug Imhoff spoke of, for someone who didn't have the same systems of support and had to always excel and always show up in a particular way to be accepted, to not only pull my own chair up to the table, but have someone make space for me at the table. I just want to elevate this reminder that you look at Kamala Harris and what she means to our party, and it is just an incredible testament to how far we've come forward. There is an incredible picture by the NAACP that was up on their Instagram right after her speech of a young Black girl looking up at the stage and seeing Kamala standing there delivering her acceptance speech. And Kamala is not all the check boxes, and we're never going to get a candidate that checks all of the boxes. But the reminder that when one of us succeeds, all of us succeed. When voice is given to outside perspectives or differing opinions or different lived experiences, all of our lived experiences are validated is such an incredible moment, I think, and that we as Democrats, we as progressives really need to glom onto and say, yes, because she is going to bring those unique voices to the table. I know that there are some online who've been poo-pooing that there weren't more Indigenous perspectives at the table for the televised portion of the DNC, that there weren't Palestinian voices, that there weren't some of these perspectives. And I myself thought about the Sudanese dynamic and what's happening in Armenia, and wishing that we had more of that international component, but also recognizing that sometimes that's not the right space or time or place for us to try to throw all the spaghetti at the wall. It's really about us celebrating what does it mean to be in this moment, to honor our nominee and her lived experience, and to remind ourselves of what we're fighting for, of what's at stake. And I think Kamala did an incredible job of keeping us on message with the goal in our sights.
Was any one particularly impactful that may have been overlooked by folks who just caught the highlights?
I've been talking with my girl group, and many of them didn't watch the main stage and the long speeches, and I understand that. It was incredible to be in the room. However, if I had been at home, I probably would have also done the highlights reel. For me, it wasn't about the main stage. It was about the activities and actions that happened earlier in the day that much of the outside public would not know about. I attended the Black Caucus and the Women's Caucus and the LGBTQI plus caucus. And being in a room with Democrats who are fighting the fights that we are having here in Alaska, who are working to ensure that every child feels loved for who they authentically are, that every Black woman is able to access maternal health that's going to protect her and her children's lives, that we really are talking about what does it mean to be women in this moment and defend our rights to body autonomy. That to me was what really galvanized me. It was those caucus meetings where I got to sit with my sisters or sit with my community or sit with people who have very similar lived experiences as my own and say, I am fighting for the person to the left of me. I'm fighting for the person to the right of me. I'm fighting for the people who are not in this room with me. And I am excited and just energized to get home and to hit the pavement and to ensure people understand what's at stake in this upcoming election.
Chuck Degnan, you were a former state House rep in the early 70s. Is that correct?
Yes. I served 2 terms in the Alaska State House. First year was on the Finance Committee, and the second time was on the Natural Resources Committee.
And you're from Unalakleet, right?
Yes, that's my hometown. I still live there, and it's a beautiful place to be. And I also served on the Native Corporation Board of Directors for Bering Strait Native Corporation.
Was this your first Democratic National Convention?
No, I started out with President Obama.
Okay, in 2008?
Yeah.
How did this convention compare with the Obama convention in 2008?
Both of them were very exciting to me. And there was a lot of participation for both conventions. And we're just following the Democrats' enthusiasm for their crew.
And now that you're out of Chicago, does the event as a whole mean anything in particular to you?
Yes, it shows how diverse our nation is. From Unalakleet, we're way out in the northern Bering Sea. Chicago is in the middle of America. It was a wonderful convention. We had participants from Alaska that were enthusiastic, and I'm very proud of our Democratic representation at the convention.
Is there any particular moment that stood out to you?
Yes, when we actually got Kamala Harris nominated.
So the end, the finale.
Yes, that was the best one.
It seems fitting to close with the finale of Kamala Harris's acceptance speech.
You know, our opponents in this race are out there every day denigrating America, talking about how terrible everything is. Well, my mother had another lesson she used to teach. Never let anyone tell you who you are. You show them who you are. Let us show each other and the world who we are and what we stand for. Freedom, opportunity, compassion, dignity, fairness, and endless possibilities. We are the heirs to the greatest democracy in the history of the world. And on behalf of our children and our grandchildren and all those who sacrificed so dearly for our freedom and liberty, we must be worthy of this moment. It is now our turn to do what generations before us have done, guided by optimism and faith, to fight for this country we love, to fight for the ideals we cherish, and to uphold the awesome responsibility that comes with the greatest privilege on earth, the privilege and pride of being an American.
Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email eastanchoragebookclub@gmail.com.